Hi. What lies beneath the soil is the big subject today, and as part of something I strongly believe in, what if we look after our soil health, our structure, it makes a huge difference to our stock, our crop yields, our quality of crops that are on farm. There is definitely this synergy between soil, plant, and animal, and in fact humans as well. And we hear more and more about this press. It's going up our agenda all the time, and it is so true that the health of our soil has a huge influence and steer on the health of us and the health of our cows, sheep, beef, whatever, and also our arable crops as well. So it's just a case of stepping back sometime and looking at soil in a slightly different manner. And if anything out of all of this discussion is, always think of your soil as a living thing. It is not a dead entity, and that's an important aspect. So I'll just try and cover a couple of aspects, just the main things. This was something we picked up in a Starbucks cafe a while ago. It must be right, Starbucks says so, and it highlights the fact even in a coffee shop that the quality of a good cup of coffee starts at the soil. And yeah, that's so true. It mimics a bit what we're trying to partly discuss today. And the importance of soil to our farms, well, everybody's farm is unique. Everybody's farm has a different type of soil. I think there's over 700 different soils in the United Kingdom. So you've all kind of technically got different soils. And if you've got the same soil as somebody else, you have a different environment, you might have a different farming system. So, you know, soils are influenced by many factors, weather, where you are, the type, the sand, the silt, the clay content, the organic matter content, etc. So soils are all different and unique to your farming, and kind of on a farm level, you'll know your soils better than anybody really. And it's just knowing how to steer them in the right direction if maybe they're going slightly wrong. If not, then that's fine. So it's every farm's greatest resource. Soils do dictate to some extent what you can grow and when you can grow crops, as well as your environment. Like I said before, it's a living environment. It's never a dead thing. The soils that are dead, that we've killed off, that aren't healthy, are what we call sick soils. There are a number of sick soils, or a percentage of sick soils in the United Kingdom. You know, we don't want to kill our soils off. They are not a chemistry set. They are a living thing. And I'll come back to this again really later on, but I consider, because my background is really feeding cows to some extent, and I always think that soil is just like feeding a cow. A cow has a rumen which feeds the cow, and the soil is the same, because a rumen's a separate entity to the cow technically. The rumen actually feeds the cow. Well, it's a bit like that with soil health. Soil is the plant's rumen. You know, the soil is feeding the plant, and a bit vice versa. So it's a living environment. So healthy soils, as we know, we're inundated with this, are important to our environment. You know, they absorb, store a lot of CO2 for a start. They help with the healthy recycling of nutrients. So, you know, really, really key to our environment. Worldwide, we're concerned about soils because of maybe the lack of organic matter, which ultimately is a good steer on the lack of maybe carbon in soils and CO2 in the atmosphere. And, you know, if we can store more CO2 in our soils, carbon really, that's the key thing. And healthy soils will store more carbon and sequence more carbon as time goes on. So, you know, so healthy soils are really, really important for the environmental story at the same time. As I just mentioned before, I've double clicked myself, you know, soil is like a rumen in cows, and it needs managing to some extent in the same way soil is the plant rumen. So, you know, it's an important thing. We wouldn't think, you know, we can, and I always kind of, one reason why I do compare this with cows really is, or any rumen, you know, if I make a cow's rumen acidic or create an instance of SARA or acidosis, then that cow will tell me very quickly within 48 hours or 24 hours that it's got a problem. You know, you'll end up with inconsistent muck, fibre in the muck, etc. Yields drop, qualities get affected. We do the same sometimes with soils, and but they don't tell us straight away. It takes a while for them to indicate that there's a problem. So, you know, we've got to be, you know, mindful of what we do to our soils. So always a big question, and been covered, I'm sure, many times before. What is a good healthy soil? Well, it does vary, but in a nutshell, what constituents are there in a good healthy soil. And it's not just the mineral side, it's everything, you know, it's its environment. And a good soil makeup approximately is something like as follows, really: 47% mineral, which would be your sand, your silt, your clay element of the soil. So the dirt, in a nutshell, as we would say in the southern hemisphere, the dirt part of your soil is made up of mineral, which, like I say, is sand, silt and clay, but which is also made up of made up of calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, silicon, etc. So, you know, that's your mineral part of your soil. But the other factors that your soil contains, and we all know about these, and we do various things to improve these, are your soil contains air, and it needs air because most of the living material in the top 10 centimeters, if you're in 10, 12 centimeters, your soil is aerobic, the bacteria, the enzymes, etc., aerobic. So air is really key to them. If we starve our soils of air, those the microbial mass will turn to anaerobic status, and anaerobic is still in soils, but it's a lot slower at breaking nutrients down, etc. So air to keep your soils aerobic is really key, because aerobic bacteria, etc., are really fast at breaking materials down. Soils just function quicker, and they're just healthier, full stop, really. So air is really important. And the one that balances off this a little bit, and is also very important, because like us, we need water, and we know about the importance of water, because obviously when we go through a drought period, our soils start to biologically slow down, nutrient flow slows down, grass growth slows down, purely because it runs out of soil water. And a nice content for soil or soil water content would be something like 22-24%, so similar balance to air. But water, again, very, very important. I mean, you could, and as often been said, you know, we've had a real rain event, and I've had issues in this area near Cumbria where we've had 10 or 12 inches of rain in a day, and you think, crumbs, my soil is 100% water. Well, yes, it might be for a short period of time, but it will try and stabilize down to this 22-24% in time. So air and water balance is really, really key. So, you know, this is something else to factor in. The next section of your soil really is also, and they're all important, organic matter. Soil without organic matter is a problem, and I have put a figure of 7% in there. It is actually a variable figure, really, is this, depending on your soil. If you've got a light soil, you want to be really plus 4%, if you can ideally do that. Ideally 5 to 7% is a nice mean. Some of you will have soils in there that are like 10-12%. So I think the thing with organic matter, and the discussion with it, is organic matter is continuously breaking down. Your soil is burning it down further, and it will end up as soil carbon and other substrates in the soil. So your organic matter is continuously breaking down. So the thing about that, if you measure soil organic matters, and if you haven't done that and you're struggling with soil health, it's a good thing is to test your organic matter. You might be really short of organic matter, and if so, you need to do things to put in place to improve your organic matter, whether that's grazing in a regen way, whether that's direct drilling, not ploughing as often, etc., more farmyard manures, etc., just to build up your organic matters again are key. So it's a good thing to measure. But the thing about organic matter as well, it's balance. You know, if your soil organic matter naturally sits at 7, and the way to find that out is to maybe test an organic matter in the middle of the field, and test a bit up towards the headland of the field or in the buffer strip, and just see how they two compare, because in the buffer strip is where your soil naturally will have an organic matter. That would be a good target level to run. But say your organic matter start to climb and get higher and higher, then maybe your soil's not breaking it down just as quick, so then that might indicate your soils are going to be compacted or a bit sick. So it's a good thing just to know is your organic matter as a point of reference, really, as such. So water, as we know, I mentioned it before, water is key. I mean, we had a bit of an issue this year where we ran out of water in April, May and June, and you can see the impact here on our grass growth curve. Without water, we cannot grow grass too well as such, so it needs water, so it's an important factor. And then air compaction, you know, if we've got soils on the right here which are compacted, that are starved of air, you know, that's not a good place to be either if you can help it. So livestock compaction, machinery compaction, key thing to watch to help correct your air water balance. It is very difficult, I appreciate that. We work in a very, a climate in the UK where it rains a lot. It can be dry one minute, wet the next. We have machinery, we have livestock, and it's just managing that. But anything you can do to look after that air water balance, I think, is absolutely key, really. So always consider your soil in terms of mineral. It's a mineral environment, which everything is, we are. It's a biological environment, it's a structural environment as well. I think that's not a bad way to think about your soil. So soil testing, we'll talk about a bit briefly later on, is very important, but it is not everything. It's understanding the soil in terms of maybe digging a hole and having a look at it. It's again like condition scoring cows. Look at the soil and see how living it actually is, if that makes sense. So it's a biological, it's a structural, and it's a mineral part of it. So soil sampling answers a lot of questions, but not every one of them, to help us understand what our soil is. So digging soils are important. This is something we did at Longnoy, but Tim's farm. So we dug in the hedge, which is a great indicator. If you want to know what your soil is naturally wanting to be biologically functioning, etc., is to have a dig in the hedgerow. Really good thing, because it gives you an idea. It's the same type of soil. It hasn't been intensely managed maybe as the main part of the field is. So if you do this in the same part of the field, so you can do the hedgerow just or into the buffer strip there, just see what your soil looks like there, and then compare it with what you've got in the middle of the field or in the main part. I mean, this slightly unfair. This is a field, we dug in the hedgerow, and then on the right we went into the middle of the field, which had been ploughed this year. So you can see there is a difference in soil structure. We've got the vertical cracking structure here, some horizontal but predominantly vertical cracking, and then obviously when a field's been ploughed, the strength, the structure has been disturbed, so you tend to get more of these horizontal cracks in the soil because it's weak for a while. We've ripped all the strength out of it when we've ploughed it, so there is a difference. But in time, that soil on the right will start to become a bit more like the hedgerow. But it's a good indicator that if you're concerned about the health of a particular field, you don't have to necessarily send stuff to the lab to find out what's wrong with it. Go and have a dig in the buffer strip or the hedge line, and then have a look in the middle of the field and see what the difference is like. It's a cheap test, it's quick, and you get a feel for what your soil's like. So it's a really useful thing to do. And soil structure, why should we bother about soil structure and health of soil? Will it affect things on the farm? Well, these are some pictures from Lancashire and Cumbria, but yeah, soil structure can affect your palatability of the grass that cows are grazing. You can have a real steer, soils that are sick, anaerobic, palatability of the grass growing in them is not fantastic. You tend to get this balance of trace elements. Certain elements are taken up more by grass that are in sicker, compacted soils. So the palatability of grass is affected by the soil structure. So if you're looking for palatability of grass to get production from grass, it's a key thing to consider. And remember, from a milk point of view, every kilo of dry matter of grass per day is worth nearly 2 litres a cow. So it's an important one. Yield and quality of grass, lots of work done on this, where grass, soil structure, health, and effective compaction on yield and quality of grass. So yes, it's worth looking at it from that point of view. Mineral profiling forages, probably why I got involved with it really with soils was the mineral profile of a forage, which is either in the grass or in the silage, can be influenced by the structure, not the mineral balance, but the structure of your soil. Grass in different environments will take up more elements in different levels depending on the soil structure. So one we tend to watch quite a bit in forages is the uptake of, say, iron for one, or molybdenum. They can be affected by the soil structure and health. So an important one to look at. If you've got mineral problems on a farm, look to your soil and the health of the soil as a first point of call. Improve breakdown of organic manures, etc. Anything you put in your life. If you've got sick soils that are compacted, don't break down organic manures just as quick, or any fertilizer, to be quite honest. So soil structure and health is key in that respect. So again, that leads on to an improvement in phosphorus and nitrogen cycle as well. So yeah, all equally important. And better grass growth, improved performance from grass, and as I mentioned before, does affect yield. I mean, there's some work out there that say that 3 to 5 tonnes difference in dry matter yield per hectare from improving your soil structure. So yeah. So this is a good point. Biology, and this is what picture from Longnaw here, but I think biology is key. It's a very, very complex, as we know, very, very complex ecosystem is soil. We know more about things that live in our oceans than we know lives in our soils. I think that's because there's such a variation of it. And one good thing is to dig and have a look for worms, which is one experiment that's going on here on a hot day. But looking for worms is a good indication, and we'll just touch on that briefly in a little while. But the soil, like I mentioned before, is like the plant's rumen. And it's been calculated that a teaspoon of soil can contain billions of different microscopic organisms, many species we know nothing about. It is a new science, really. But again, it's the cow's rumen. Remember, the cow's rumen is full of biology, microorganisms, bacteria, etc. So is your soil. One's anaerobic, which is the rumen. One's aerobic, which is your soil. So it's a good one to always remember. And I have this key here. I've got the soil and the grass in the middle here, and this is a nice thing to think about. The stocking rate is similar, if not more, underneath the soil as it is on the surface. So if you've got a cow per acre, then you'll have literally, and there's various numbers on these, but you should have a cow an acre roughly of a living material in every acre in just under the surface of your soil. And that's a key one. And I always bring this one up about soil pH, as people ask me, what is the ideal soil pH? And I know that's a moving feast as to where you are, but an ideal soil pH might be 6 to 6.5. So an ideal of 6.2, for example. And that's the same in a rumen. It's the same pH in a rumen. If I have a soil rumen pH that drops below 5.5, I have a cow with acidosis. Now, if I drop a soil pH below 5.5, unless it's a dark peaty soils, they don't work as well. It's not as efficient at breaking things down. It's the same with the cow's rumen, so it's just like feeding a cow. So I'm considering organic matter, 5 to 7% ideal, that's what you want. But organic matter helps with drainage, soil flexibility, strength. It's the food source for all your microorganisms, biology in your soil. So it is key. If you do not have biology in your soils will be like a brick. They don't work very well, don't retain water, they don't drain water. The whole thing starts to collapse. So organic matter is key, really, all the way through. And without it, we're doomed. So it is really important to look after our organic matters and correct the right balance. And we've got all sorts, bug life, insects, the mighty worm. There are a lot of other things that live in the soil. I mean, it is a jungle down there in the soil, as talked about before. Everything's eating something else. It's just a real, it's just a proper jungle in there. But worms, really, tiger of the jungle, if you will, apart from moles that eat worms. But worms are key. They move a lot of soil. They're good for soil drainage. They create warmer soils because you move more water. They move from a point of view of moving soil estimates. When I was in New Zealand, we used to estimate that you could move 40 tons of soil per year per acre. That would be not one worm, but a good population of worms, could move 40 tons of soil per year. And they don't use diesel, they don't need to be paid overtime. So they're a good tillage bit of equipment as well. So soils are, worms are key in soil. Their excrement's really nutritious. They are a secret fertilizer factory. They're breaking down the FYM your cows broke down into. If you're an FYM, they break it down again, and so it makes it more and more nutritious for further crop growth after that. And when I'm looking for worms, in spring when soils are like 8, up to 10 degrees, 12 degrees, no more really. If I can get 6 to 10 worms per cubic foot, quite happy with that. So worms, that's a good indicator of how healthy your soil is. And worms can live quite a while. A good old earthworm in the hedge bottom might be 10 or 12 years old, some of them. So they have quite a bit of age to them in some respects. So just the next part, in brief, mineral. And this would really fall into soil testing or soil sampling, really, to some extent. And at Longnaw, we've done quite a lot of soil sampling, or Tim has over the years, lots of in-depth reports on soils. But why is soil sampling important? Well, it is a legal kind of requirement now, going through with the Soil Protection for Water Act. If you put fertiliser FYM on land, you really have to soil sample at least every 5 years. So it is important from that point of view. But, it's a good indicator of your soil status. And if you think about an 80-20 rule, for example, And if you think that 20% could make 80% of a difference to your soil, well, think pH. If you've got a soil sample with 4 aspects on it, pH, phosphate, potassium and magnesium, you know, if you think of that, so it's 25%, if you thought 25% of that report, the pH part of it, that could improve soil structure by maybe 80% if that pH is incorrect. So pH is a good one to focus on. But the other things you can do with your soils that you can is test your soil type. Is it sand, silt, clay? What mix is it of all those aspects? How much organic matter is there? Check your calcium, magnesium, sulfur, some other trace elements in there as well. You can soil test for biological status. That is still a tricky area, but we are getting better as it, isn't it, as an industry, I believe. So there are all things to maybe look at. And soil pH, basic and good grassland management, I believe, you know, our forefathers were doing it years ago. The Romans were believed to have done it, and they were putting calcareous minerals products onto soils to improve the crop growth, if they will. So it's been going on for a long while, but pH is a nice one to do. And I know everybody does this, but soil pH, key bits to remember: rumen pH, soil pH, they're the same, 6 to 6.5, that's what you want. 59% of all soils are not at optimum levels for pH, and that includes arable as well. I think the latest on grassland was something like 38, 39% were below optimum for soil pH, so on grassland, so not as bad as this final figure makes out. But it's the single most important chemical property for soil. You know, and if we remember, it's logarithmic, so pH being 7, well, a pH of 6 is 10 times more acidic than a pH 7. So again, soils with grass, you know, it likes to be slightly acidic if it's possible. We don't always have that aspect, depending on where we live, but a 6 pH is 10 times more acidic than 7. And then if we go to a pH 5, which we do get on soils, it's 100 times more acidic than 7. And those do occur out there, low soil pHs. And I've even had soils below 5 going towards 4, and they are 1,000 times more acidic than 7. So every point of your pH scale is significant when it comes to correcting soil pH. And the effects of soil pH are well known. You know, below 5.8 you end up with more fungi. Biased soil above 7, we end up with a bacteria biased soil. So and a nice balance is to have a balance of fungi and bacteria, and this is where the target pH of say 6, 6.5 is a good number to run at. So and the other aspect about low soil pH is, you know, get below 4.5. I know we don't all have them, but there are soils out there below 4.5. Earthworms die. Weeds really dominate some of these low soil pHs. Fertilizer utilization is affected by pH greatly. So is soil structure. So if you're trying to fix your soil structure and you've got a low soil pH, fix your soil pH and your soil structure by aeration, etc. at the same time. Makes a big difference. And remember, a pH, it's a balance of nutrients to some extent, and good things to consider when you're managing your pH are minerals from below. Really, calcium's a big one. You know, it can have a 60 to 8% variance on your soil pH. Magnesium's and also the other element, a big one, important. So this is why we have magnesium-based limes or calcium-based limes to fix soils. You know, but know your soils. Do you need a calcium? Do you need a magnesium based lime to fix them? So it is important to know your soils. But there's other elements that can affect your soil pH as well. Often forgot. It is not always down to just one element to fix your soil pH. It's a balance of the 4, and the other 2 are potassium, which is obviously quite high in dairy slurries, for example, and the other one is sodium. So those 4 elements have a bearing on your soil pH. So it's important, if you can, to understand your soil pH, is to know these 4. If you get them in balance, then there's a good chance your soil pHs will stay more stable as time goes on. Calcium, I'll just focus on one of the 4. Calcium really is a big player in soil pH. It's also key for plant cell formation. It's key for soil biology. It's noticeable in young plants. You know, if you're short of calcium, you won't get the vigor. It's very good for legume growth, or clovers, for example. It affects grass palatability. So soils with a low soil calcium level can have an issue with grass palatability when it comes to grazing. And calcium is one of the elements that has a key effect on soil flocculation. and it's the only mineral to do this. Magnesium is slightly opposite than this. It tightens soil, whereas calcium can make soils flocculate, open out, whereas magnesium will tighten it. Now, magnesium is useful if you're trying to tighten soils to hold on to nutrients, so you know there's a plus to each of those. But it's an absolutely key element of soil, calcium. So it's one to watch. If you're struggling with palatability, if you're struggling with structure, calcium's the one to get an angle on. What is my calcium level in my soil? So a good one to test. And also calcium affects the calcium levels in the diet. This is some older work. pH 4.7 in soil had an effect of the percentage in the forage, 0.44. I'll just flick through these. pH 5, 0.51. So the soil pH has had an effect on the amount of calcium in the actual forage. 5.8, 6.4. So a pH of 6.3, the soil calcium, the forage calcium level was 0.68, which is virtually what a cow requires. You know, you get down to a pH of 4.7 at a 0.44 percentage of calcium in your forage, then you're going to have to supplement that cow with quite a bit of calcium to make up the shortfall in calcium. So it has an effect on the forage, so it's one to remember. And a cow's calcium requirement can be between 0.67 and even up to 1% calcium in every kilo of dry matter. So it's an important one to bear in mind if your forage calcium levels are low. Look to your soil pHs as well. Don't kid yourself about having a good soil pH. It needs balance of the 4, as I said before. I sometimes get the statement, our soil pH is increasing, but we have not applied any lime for a year. Well, a scenario could be, and often is, so slurry is often high in potassium, which is a cation. It drives up soil pH. But this is not potassium doesn't really have a positive effect on soil structure. So, you know, putting a lot of slurry on, you can actually push your soil pH to, maybe kidding yourself, it's a good soil pH, but it's not very balanced. This is the problem, and you're pushing calcium balance out by having more potassium, and this can be an issue on soil structure and health. So, you know, if your pHs are going up and you haven't applied lime, think what else have you added to that soil to lift that pH. It could be slurry. I'm not saying it would be, but it could be one to just get an idea of, really, and therefore just check your soil structures with a spade again. And some ways, you know, these are not all magic bullets, but other things that can help improve soil structure and health are equipment. Like I said, they're not a magic bullet for everybody, but they can help where needed, but only when conditions allow. Never do it when it's wet. Always do it when the conditions are good. You do not want to smear those soils. So sometimes a good thing to do in spring or autumn. In the middle of summer, yeah, but if you do it when it's too dry, you could dry your soil out and run out of grass growth again. So pick your times, but there's aerators at the bottom left there, which are good for livestock pans, slurry pans, etc. And then you've got the deeper sward lifters and shakerators there if you've got deeper pans on your soil, all there to get air in there. And air, remember, keenly drives your soil biological function, and that's a really, really important factor. So so always think of soils as a living environment. Think of them as the cow, really, in some respects. It's like feeding a cow or any ruminant, and treat them in the same way. It's not purely a chemistry set. So with that, I will thank you very much and see you soon. Take care.